I wanted to make a lighting projectile only based crossbow build that annihilates everything on my screen, but does so in a way that comes online right away. I do not want to wait till Act 3 or Endgame or whatever. No, the moment I leave the character creation screen, I want it, and I want it to stay powerful from level 1 till level 100. But the first lighting related ability for a crossbow unlocks at skill gem level 5 though, and it's not great versus bosses. What do we do? Does our plan here fall in the water right from the get-go? No. Trust the process. I cooked up a build that will absolutely destroy both versions of the campaign and endgame, a build that zaps everything on your screen into micro dust, gives you amazing mobility and performs exceptionally well versus bosses, to the point that even the most hated bosses in the game simply become a joke. More importantly, all of this without having to farm, get lucky RNG, get the best gear. No small letters at the bottom of the screen. Everything you will see today works with minimal requirements, so it's accessible to everyone, and then you can accordingly go destroy endgame. Okay, so how does it work? My build and progression path here works in 2 steps. The pre-plasma burst build and the post-plasma burst build. Say that 10 times, please, I dare you. But what is a plasma blast? Is that something you can eat? No. Plasma blast is a huge Kamehameha-esque type of skill in the game that shoots off a lightning beam that combos very well with a lot of things, but it's unlocked only at level 13 skill gem. So for now, we have to start with level 1 with the pre-plasma blast build that is amazing as well. For this build, we immediately grab high velocity rounds as early as early act 1. You unlock this skill pretty much right away, but till a skill gem for it drops, you can use those first minutes to abuse the permafrost plus fragmentation rounds combo for fast clears. When you get high velocity, put scatter shot and double barret on it immediately. The beams that you will shoot out with your crossbow will become much more impressive visually, but more importantly also deal better damage, and also it kind of foreshadows of what's to come. And then double barrel will allow us to hit more before having to reload. Really good. The damage scaling on this skill with dimension gems is really nice, especially early on too, and every shot will take a good chunk of the boss's HP and gives you a feeling of power. You can combo high velocity rounds with armor piercing rounds to also use its property to deal extra damage on armor break. However, what is even better is using gas grenades. You will unlock these a little bit later relative to when you unlocked high velocity rounds, but we supplement gas grenades with corrosion and armor explosion, which will give these grenades the property to break armor and will accordingly also reward you with explosions when you get the armor break, making it an ideal idea to combo these enhanced grenades with your high velocity rounds. Not to mention that the armor break high velocity cleanse combo works much better with a grenade, as you don't have to swap bullets constantly, so you just throw out the gas grenades on whatever you're fighting and spam high velocity rounds at the same time for a smooth gameplay loop that destroys everything. So for bosses, you're then completely set. And versus mobs, you can keep using the freeze and frag combo mixed with some explosive grenades till you unlock galvanic shards, which you want to unlock right away when you get your first level 5 skill gem. Now, I said that galvanic shards is not that amazing versus bosses, which it isn't, I wasn't lying, it will never be, but what it is that it's extremely great versus mobs and clearing, and hence why I want to get it as soon as possible, the moment we unlock it. It will make you speed through maps and dungeons quickly. It is also the first lighting based skill that's going to be a staple of the remainder of the build, and early on it will carry you going through all these dungeons. The early game support gem supplementation for this skill is going to be simple: lighting infusion and primal armament, and we use these 2 support gems to make galvanic shards damage extra juicy. Don't worry about other gems for now, I will get to that as the video progresses, I got you. Most importantly is to know that with this combination you have a very good clearing tool. It's amazing, like Castle Duels sponsoring today's video. Thanks. Wait, what? Castle Duels? What is that? I hear you asking. Well, Castle Duels is a unique PvP card strategy game with tower defense mechanics. What I personally like about it is that it has an extensive strategic component to it through deck building and battle boosts. There are a lot of ways to modify your playstyle and enhance that till you get the best outcomes, and variety is also a thing, as the game has over 30 unique 3D units to summon and merge. It's a PvP game that takes place in real time and comes with a clan system with tournaments and events, so there's always a reason to play, beating others without playing them, but also having the better deck gives the game a nice competitive aspect. So check Castle Duels out using the QR code or the link in the description. And initially, I have to be honest, I didn't really know what to expect when playing this game, as it didn't really look like the games that I usually play, but it quickly grew on me with the many options regarding deck building and strategies. Trying a bunch of different cards and combinations to see what works well and gives you synergies is a fun experience, especially since it's a mobile game and thus it's flexible to open and play. From 19 December and onwards, there's also the Winter Wonderland holiday event where players can collect decorative cards, earn unique rewards like the Frost Knight, and try their luck out with a festive roulette for legendary prizes. So what are you waiting for? Download Castle Duels now using the QR code on screen or my link in the description, and you'll get a special Master Chest bonus with gold, a set of cards, and magic dust, which can be exchanged for a legendary card. Now you want to be on the lookout for a somewhat fitting crossbow early on. It doesn't matter what the stats, just get something that sounds decent when comparing damage, and preferably with extra physical or elemental damage in the description. However, what is important, in my opinion of course, is to socket it as soon as possible. And if you don't know what that means, just please watch my starter's guide, which some say is the best starter's guide of all time, and you will know everything you will ever need to know. But more importantly, for the socket, get a rune with lightning damage if you couldn't get a lightning damage modifier in your crossbow. One preferably, two even better. And it's not going to be hard to get these from my experience. These runes drop quite frequently. But why, you ask? Well, inherent lightning damage with our crossbow will make our high velocity rounds be able to proc the shock status effect on your enemies. It's this icon, you can't miss it. But more importantly, you can also visually see this effect being applied on your enemies. They will start getting this mark of death, meaning yeah, this is it. But why do you actually want the lightning damage on your crossbow so early on? Well, it's going to come in handy for the next skill that you want to get. And you will get this one a bit later, I'm estimating somewhere in Act 2, but you will get access to shock burst rounds. And see, these shock burst rounds deal really good damage versus anything that is shocked, and absolutely terrible damage versus everything that is not shocked. But since we don't really have a good way to apply shock yet, we have to be creative. High velocity rounds has a high innate scaling, so from my experience it procs shock relatively frequently, not all the time, but the rate of proccing became consistent enough for me to start recommending to use shock burst rounds as early as you can possibly get it. For me, it was the deciding factor. So the gameplay loop now evolves to this: galvanic shards versus mobs and clearing, keep using it for that purpose. Then when you get to elites or bosses, keep throwing them gas grenades out for the armor break, keep spamming high velocity rounds to chunk off their damage with each and every bolt, and then when the shock icon occasionally pops up, do a little celebration because you can now swap over to shock burst rounds, which will annihilate everything that is shocked. So unload all your load on it with shock burst rounds till your enemy loses the shock status effect. Then you swap back to high velocity rounds. So even though high velocity rounds isn't a lightning skill, with a little bit of thinking, we can use shock burst rounds in a way that is also an improvement DPS wise and makes the build more dynamic. For our shock burst rounds early on, you want to supplement it with martial tempo to make sure we get as many of these bolts in before the shock duration expires, and concentrated effect to get an easy way to enhance its damage output without contesting the lightning damage based enhancing gems of galvanic shards. And yes, concentrated effect does in fact work, even though shock burst rounds initial spray of bolt isn't really an AoE effect. Hovering over the support gem shows a green check mark in front of the skill, and this support gem definitely saved me a headache or two. One more thing is you will need to get Herald of Thunder as soon as possible for your persistent buff, as it will help out insanely well with your clear and burst, and it synergizes very well with galvanic shards, as those will apply shock consistently on mobs, and then Herald of Thunder will strike the rest extra hard when you kill shocked enemies. This is a very good and mandatory persistent buff for all stages of this build's progression path. We then supplement this amazing persistent buff with magnified effect to make its reach bigger, but also long shot when you unlock tier 2 support gems, as its range is actually really good and impressive, so we can then benefit from Herald of Thunder's extreme range to give it more damage. So that basically covers the combo strategy for Act 1, Act 2 and Act 3. You will have a blast and you will succeed, trust me. You have 4 core skills and a persistent buff that you can supplement with the earlier mentioned skills, but also other skills like flash grenades to have a stun and a get out of jail for free button essentially when surrounded by mobs, and you can add any skill you like. But ultimately you will drop all of that, and only shock burst rounds, Herald of Thunder and galvanic shards will survive the decapitation of the pre-plasma blast build. Finishing off Act 3 and heading into Act 1 Cruel or maybe Act 2 Cruel, you will be up to level to get Plasma Blast, and now everything will change. We will become a lightning damage based build, and a lightning damage based build only. And our clearing and boss killing capacity becomes even better. Now Plasma Blast takes a long ass time to fully charge, at least in the context of clearing maps and dungeons, so its use case will be mostly versus bosses. However, even in a dungeon, sometimes you can't resist the urge when things are aligned nicely, or you just get some time to load up this beautiful blue beam, and things get better when we pair it up with our first and absolutely mandatory main gem that we're going to run on Plasma Blast, which is Scatter Shot. Yes, our BFF that we used on High Velocity as well is now going to be put on Plasma Blast. See, without Scatter Shot, you shoot one beam. but with scatter shot you start shooting not 1, not 2, but 3 beams, so it gives you a lot of extra power and utility. The main combat loop in boss fights then becomes as following. You can pre-charge Plasma Blast while the boss is still yapping or doing RP stuff, then start blasting them accordingly. After getting all beams in, you pretty much will always proc shock with at least one of the 3 beams out of my experience. And when that happens and you see the indicator, you want to swap over to shock burst rounds and finish the job. Shock burst rounds, as earlier mentioned, does a lot of damage when there's shock applied on the enemy. And you want to shock burst rounds the boss all the way through the clip and you'll get absolutely amazing damage, even with very bad gear, which I definitely had during leveling. I didn't bother to upgrade my gear because ain't nobody got time for that when you just do this type of damage in the first place, even without investing a single coin in upgrading gear. As you see, even on what people consider to be the hardest bosses of the campaign, like you saw in the intro, but also this one, you see that the combo will just absolutely annihilate them with my setup here. To get this type of damage in boss fights, we then run Plasma Blast with the earlier mentioned scatter shot, but also Primal Armament, which syncs very well with its innate scaling, and then Lightning Exposure as our third gem to give the subsequent shock burst rounds even more damage, since that's going to be still the biggest source of damage. If you then progress further on and you have a 4 gem slot, then Hourglass is also really nice to give it a huge 40% boost. However, it does come at the cost of a 10 seconds extra CD, so it only use it if you're very comfortable with using the skill, as even if you load it up but you get hit out of it, you'll still have to wait 10 seconds. So it will be a bit clunky if you're not fully comfortable with the skill yet. On the other hand, for shock burst rounds, we still run Martial Tempo to make sure we get as many bolts in during the shock time frame, then paired up with Concentrate Effect, and at this point in time you'll also have level 3 gems as well, so we then accordingly run Elemental Focus because we don't care about afflicting status effects on our enemies when using the skill, we just need for it to do as much damage as possible, and that's exactly what this gem gives us. It's really good. On the other hand, for clearing, we still use Galvanic Shards now that we have Plasma Blast, but there will also be situations where you can combine all 3 main lightning damage skills. For example, if you've already loaded up Plasma Blast and you can change directions midway for every beam that you shoot out, so that's kind of nice, and then you can combine it accordingly with Galvanic Shards. However, your main goal clearing wise is just to use Galvanic Shards. You will one-shot most mob groups with how the skill works. It feels very nice and smooth to use, and if there's an elite somewhere in the mob group that survives the initial blasting with Galvanic Shards, you just swap over to shock burst rounds to get a nice clear and finish. But through all acts, Galvanic Shards will stay consistently effective and really never fall off. It's really good. So we still run Galvanic Shards with Lightning Infusion since we gave Primal Armament to Plasma Blast now, but we combine this gem now with Close Combat as well, since the skill is pretty much always shot off when enemies are right in your face, so it consistently procs Close Combat for extra damage. And then when you get a level 3 support gem, absolutely put Fork on it. It makes clearing so much smoother. It basically enhances the spread of your Galvanic Shards after they hit that first mob, which feels really good. Try it out. And hand in hand with our Galvanic Shard goes obviously our persistent buff, Herald of Thunder, and these two combine so well you can basically consider them one skill when you're clearing, and we can amplify Herald of Thunder even more. First of all, the most important gem in the post Plasma Blast build is going to be Innervate. Put it on your Herald of Thunder immediately. It will proc all the time through how much Herald of Thunder procs, giving you even more lightning damage. Then Magnified Effect and Long Shot in addition as earlier described. Nothing changes for those two gems. Alright, aside from the 3 main skills, you are then able to get Emergency Load post a level 11 skill gem, which you definitely will have now since you have Plasma Blast as well, and you want to use this skill on cooldown. Every time it gets off cooldown, just press the button. It's a simple to use skill, but very effective, since every time you use it, you reload your bolts indicated with a yellow number, meaning all of these bolts in yellow deal extra damage for you. So it's basically just free extra damage with a simple button click, but the skill comes with a long cooldown, so a no-brainer gem to use on it is going to be Ingenuity to reduce said cooldown, and Premeditation since it directly empowers the sole reason we use the skill, so another no-brainer for me. And then Persistence for a third gem to make the damage buff last longer is also nice. Okay, so we have now discussed all the stuff that is related to our crossbow specifically, but we also want to use 2 non-crossbow abilities to finalize this build here. So I included Shield Charge here for my build, and after experimentation I found this skill to enhance our mobility significantly. You will notice that without Shield Charge you will just have to run all the time, so my solution here is a great fix to that. But Shield Charge is also really nice to progress faster, especially in maps with a lot of corridors or zigzaggy pathways. You can Shield Charge through all of that very effectively instead of having to manually run and direct your character. But aside from the movement enhancing aspects of this skill, it's also great in boss fights to either simply dodge attacks that rather affect a larger area, or just to reposition yourself to set up nicely for a Plasma Plasma Blast that you then can accordingly charge more peacefully. Now you might get confused here by my choice to run a shield on my mercenary, but it's simple. How I do this is just by using 2 weapon sets to accomplish my goal, since shield charge, as the name implies, is tied to a shield. How do I do this? I put a shield in my second weapon set and then just get the skill, equip it. When you then drag it over to your skills, it might initially say that you don't have the right weapon to use it. You then just swap over your weapon set to weapon set 2 in the interface on the right, and it will lighten up back in your skill interface, and you can then accordingly put it in your hotbar. Shield charge is tied to having a strength requirement, which we will definitely have as we are a strength dexterity based build. Now your character will very dynamically and smoothly switch between the shield and your crossbow when pressing different skills. You don't even notice the weapon swap whatsoever, making it a great option here to enhance my build. Hence why I recommend it to you to also run it. And we run rage for our first support gem on it, giving us rage, and then if we collide with something while we're moving, and that's actually also something we want since it means we end up right on the mobs, proccing close combat for example. But this gem also encourages you to do that because now we get rewarded with more damage through rage. And then for our second gem, we run Unbreakable to have a higher stun resist during the movement. On the topic of building up rage, we're going to up it a notch and actually build up a lot of rage with our ballista. For those that are not familiar with the rage mechanic in Path of Exile 2, it's basically just extra damage. The mechanic is very simple. It's a percentage-based multiplier of your attack damage based on the number of rage that you have. Say you have 10 rage, you then have 10% extra attack damage. So keep that in mind because we're going to run Ripwire Ballista as our final skill. First of all, aside from the rage, it's a really good skill to take aggro off you and distract bosses, annoying elites, anything really, and that can accordingly give you room to breathe and, for example, load up your Plasma Blast. It is really good for that purpose, while it also provides you damage and CC of its own. But more importantly, in synergy with the rage built by our shield charge, we can give our ballista the Font of Rage gem, which if we just accordingly stand on it, then we can build up rage while standing on the ballista before the fight even starts. And your rage can go all the way up to 30, as you see in the top left corner of your screen. And that is a lot of extra damage just by, standing on or near your ballista. It synergizes extremely well with our main boss fight combo, because in the meantime we can charge up our Plasma Blast and then go for the Plasma Blast into Shock Burst rounds combo, and it makes everything very deadly. Aside from Font of Rage, we also run Font of Blood for the sustain, and for a third gem I like to run Lockdown to enhance its CC. Ancestral Urgency is also a really good gem to run until you unlock Font of Rage. So we pretty much have all abilities on lockdown now, and if you followed all my reasoning so far, you see we have a very synergistic and fun build that performs very well. But to finalize it, we have to talk about our persistent buffs a little bit more as well. We already talked about Herald of Thunder, but we really want to run Wind Dancer as well, just for the sustain. Since running Wind Dancer, I really can't even remember the last time I died in a game. It's really good, and we run Cannibalism with it to make the sustain very juicy, and you can in addition run Blind and Pin to make the CC effect even better. So Wind Dancer and Herald of Thunder are both your main persistent buffs. However, I've also started to really like using Overwhelming Presence with Precision and Vitality gems as a third persistent buff in addition, since it will make applying stun and status effects like shock easier. However, combining these three might ask a lot of spirit from you because running 3 different persistent buffs and then accordingly they are enhanced by spirit related gems as well, so you might not be able to run all 3 right away until you have enough spirit from say the witch quest or your gear, say for example your armor chest or your amulet. You can run Voltaic Mark instead. Voltaic Mark isn't a persistent buff, it's a skill, and it's essentially the same as Overwhelming Presence in the sense that it applies shock easier on your targets, but you have to manually keep applying it. In turn, however, it makes your shock a better shock essentially, as you see in this clip where I'm fighting 2 bosses at the same time. The one without Voltaic Mark gets 23% increased damage, while the one with Voltaic Mark gets 29 extra damage. So it is a trade-off with pros and cons, but consistently having to reapply the skill kinda felt tedious to me, so I mostly recommend to use it as a solution till you get enough spirit to run Overwhelming Presence. With that then we have our skills and persistent buffs donezo. Yes. Honorable mentions however to Shield Wall, which we can use due to our shield, and I kinda like the skill which essentially makes a wall that surrounds you and can ward off enemies, but it can also trick bosses, and you can actually blow it up with all your skills like your Galvanic Shards for a nice explosion that damages as well while you have this protective layer. So there's synergy to be found here, but it's definitely not needed and optional at most, since most of the time you will be killing everything right away anyways. And another honorable mention, by the way, is you clicking the subscribe button right now. Right now, because if for some reason you're still not subscribed to me, well, the time has come to correct that mistake. Let's move on to our tree then. How do we spec into it and what route? You know the drill. We start on the right side, it's just more damage, and get the attack speed there as well, since early on our lighting damage won't be that big of a part of our build, as earlier explained in the video if you remember, so we focus more on the general buffs. So we path towards the big boy instant reload node first of all to make Crossbow play a lot smoother, and we pick up the movement speed nodes along the way. Then we progress south towards reusable ammunition, get everything on the top side of the Crossbow patterned nodes except for full salvo for now, go up on the tree again, get curved weapon and colossal weapons and all the nodes on the way, giving us a lot more damage and just good stuff. And at this point in time your lighting damage will become a lot more fundamental and a core part of the build, so we now start getting lighting damage nodes close to the Crossbow shape, with the big boy nodes being lightning rod, which is really good. And then we progress towards flash storm. We grab everything from the lighting base nodes here and move towards the funky colored nodes, which enhance elemental damage and related effects, which means all our lighting damage and our shock procs. We then grab forces of nature and emboldened avatar and all the nodes en route. We skip the flask related node since it's bad, so it's gray. At this point in time you'll consistently reload your Crossbow with various bolts, so pick up full salvo now as well. And now we go back towards the starting side. We also grab all these lighting and shock related nodes as well, with spreading shocks being the main node here and everything upwards to it. And then we start heading towards the node of the ranger and get file wounds, clean shot and honed instinct from this side. Now file wounds has this huge 33% extra damage against anything affected by elemental status effects like shock, and that's exactly what we do all the time, so you can see why I went for it. And then the other two are the nodes surrounding it, which is more damage and speed, of which both are going to be good for the build. And by this time you will have definitely defeated the campaign and destroying everything in endgame as well, so this tree will cover you to at least level 70, level 75 or so. Regarding Ascendancy, we go Witch Hunter and grab the Judge, Jury and Executioner path to get a lot more burst, with Culling Strike being especially nice versus annoying elites and bosses that reach a certain threshold in HP to insta-kill them, and Decimating Strike benefiting your first hit. Most people will get their third and fourth Ascendancy after level 70 from what I've seen, so I will be going over that in the full endgame version video of this build. Finally, crossbows, armor and your shield that you want to be on the lookout for while leveling. It's as following. Regarding your crossbow, something like this will be nice. You want to prio physical, raw or percentage based damage and elemental damage. Specifically lightning damage of course, since it synergizes with our build the most, and things like extra levels to projectiles and attack speed is also really nice. From my experience, try to avoid crit damage. I know I talked about it in my other video, but I realized it's not really worth it with the low crit chance that you get. For shield, it doesn't really matter what type of stats you run on it, since we use it mostly as a mobility ability, so at most it's going to be active a few seconds at a time, but things like resistances and extra life is obviously going to be nice in case you get hit while trying to shield charge things. For armor, you want to have a mix of evasion and armor as your base, and for modifiers, prio resistances of any kind, balance it out for all 4 main resistances in the game, and raw extra maximum life for the best sustain. Also get spirit on your amulet and chest armor to help with being able to run the 3 persistent buffs that we talked about earlier with the support gems. Then for boots, get movement speed with the absolute highest priority. Say something like 30% extra movement speed is going to be nice, and then this aspect mixed with our shield charge is going to give us amazing mobility. And with that, you now know how to level this build for essentially every part of the game till you reach endgame, and then know how to tackle endgame accordingly. I will also however have a video coming up as a follow-up, specifically for those final 20 levels or so, min-maxing for endgame to a T. Until that moment, let me know in the comments what you think of my build, and let me know when you want the endgame version to be out.